Next up, we have the last panel of today. So again, Ryan, please. There you go. And I would like to call on stage first David Kay from Upside Foods. You can sit next to Ryan. Then next up, Marion Meigo Fonseca from Gelatex. And then last but not least, Marion Bazille from Big Idea Ventures. Enjoy your discussion.
Thank you, Karin. And nice to see that there is quite a lot of people still. End of the conference, there will be interesting prizes in the end. Not the mushrooms, I mean, the other prizes about the pitching competition and all that. That will be interesting. I'm also excited who is winning. To warm up, I promised the last joke of the day. Are you ready for another cheesy one? Of course you are. So, it's only funny in English. Who is the wettest animal in the North Pole? It's not geographically correct all the way, but as I mentioned, it's connected with the name. It's a reindeer. Very nice approach to that. But please ask questions. Please no comments about my cheesy jokes, but good questions are waiting and mushrooms are waiting. Actually, from the last prize is still waiting also. But to warm up our panel, we can start with David. Maybe you can do a small introduction. What is your everyday work and how is Upside Foods, what is Upside Foods doing on our interesting topic, the cultivated meat?
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for being here and for making it all the way to the end. My name is David Kay. I'm the Director of Communications and first employee at Upside Foods. We are a cultivated meat company based in California, long ways away in the San Francisco Bay Area. We used to be called Memphis Meats. We rebranded last year, so you may be more familiar with the old brand. But essentially, we are a company producing meat, poultry, and seafood grown directly from animal cells without the need to raise and slaughter billions of animals. And so the idea is we can give people the same meat that they have loved for millennia, but without needing any sort of behavior change, without needing to ask them to give up meat or to switch to plants or to reduce their meat consumption. And so, as I said, we're based in Berkeley, California. We were the first cultivated meat company in the world. And my role, I've worn a lot of hats, but my role is primarily focused on external communications, public relations, things like that, as well as government affairs. And in particular, I lead our policy and government affairs shop on the state and local side within California. So really excited to be here.
I think we'll have questions later, but one very interesting question. Why to rebrand the name?
It's a great question, yeah. A few reasons. First off, we wanted a name that really spoke to the positive vision of the world that we had. And Memphis Meats, I think Memphis Meats really adequately got across the end product and sort of the meat centricity of our brand, which was great, but it didn't really convey the vision we had for the future, and we wanted something that could do that. The other thing is, Memphis Meats and folks who don't live in the U.S. may not be as familiar with the connotations, but Memphis is a city in Tennessee as well as Egypt, but ours was named after the one in Tennessee. And it is a very barbecue-centric connotation with that city. And barbecue is certainly one of the types of meat that we are going to tackle, but it's not the only one. And so we wanted something that was also a bit more versatile and would allow us to go into other types of meat without it feeling a little off.
Thank you. Interesting point. Marion, please, maybe some words about the Gelatex. And you mentioned you have 6 different compositions related to cultivated meat. So please, maybe a short overview.
Yes, so my name is Marion. I'm one of the co-founders of Gelatex. Gelatex is an Estonian materials technology startup that makes nanofibrous materials that give the right texture for cultured meat and also enable the mass production of it. So we have actually 2 different products for cultured meat. One is the scaffolds, and the other is microcarriers. So scaffolds is basically like you can imagine a sheet of material consisting of small nanofibers, which enable these cells to start to differentiate and basically form a muscle tissue. And the other is microcarriers, which are more like for unstructured products, which will be used in these bioreactors where the cells can attach and start to proliferate. So also to have basically more space for the cells to attach in order for them to start to proliferate. Besides that, our technology is based on our proprietary nanofiber production technology that actually can be used also for various other industries, such as wound care or filtration or energy storage. But cultured meat is one of the main focus areas for us. But yes, our products, then you will not find them on a supermarket. We are a B2B company. You could think about us as our products are kind of ingredients, or actually more correct is to say even like processing aids. So you could think about us more like a bacteria that is used for cheese production or something like that.
Thank you. And Marion, please give us a short overview about Big Idea Ventures.
Yes, sure.
It's green, yeah? Yeah, it should. Try it.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yes, so I'm Marion, very glad to be here, thank you. So I'm working for Big Idea Ventures, so we a hybrid venture capital and an accelerator program. So the way we're working is that we invest and we support early stage startups, so that means pre-seed, seeds, or pre-series A startups in the alternative protein space. So actually we have three main categories of investment. We have plant-based startups, we have fermentation, and we have agricultural cellular startups. So we do invest in final product, but also in ingredients or enabled technology, like Gelatex, for example. The idea is really to speed up the time to market of those products. And so to do that, we have now offices in the US and in Singapore, in New York and in Singapore. This is where the fund was launched 4 years ago. And now for a year, we have offices in Paris, where I'm based. And so I'm mainly responsible for the European region. And so the accelerator works in a way that twice a year, we select the best early stage startups in the alternative protein space. We give them a first ticket of 200K, and then we support them in a 5-month intensive program where we go through every step of the growth journey. So it can be formulation, R&D, building a team, HR strategy, but also building a pitch deck, reach out to investors. So we really help them on all of that. And so, yeah, so in 4 years, we've invested in more than 100 companies now, and making us in 2021 the most active investor in the food tech space.
And we are, of course, Panelists cultivated meat, but maybe you can select from other areas also. Maybe one or two really nice success stories?
Yes, sure. One of the first investment we've done 4 years ago was in Gourmet. So I don't know if you know this French company. They're doing basically foie gras. Very successful company. They're about to launch on the Singapore market. So very interesting one, they just recently raised a very nice round. And maybe very recently, we invested in a startup based in Germany. They called Cultivated Food, and they're doing cell-based fat. We always think about cultivated meat, but actually there's a lot of needs on fats as well. So I think it's definitely a very interesting company as well.
Okay, you already reached to my question that was in the list behind. It's good. Do you agree with this kind of sentence, the idea that fat is a new protein in this area, cultivated meat area? What do you think?
I think it's definitely interesting, and basically, when you see meat, it's a very complex product. It's made of a lot of things. If you just take an egg, for example, it's such an incredible product. You have a lot of functionalities in terms of organoleptic properties. It's very rich, and I think when we think about alternative proteins, we can't only think about getting a final product or just thinking about meat, fish, or egg, but we need to think of a complexity of a product that actually requires texture, taste, but also oils, actually play a very important role in those products.
Maybe David can comment also about the fat part. How are you doing with that? Are you using the cultivated fat already?
Yeah, we have a number of different avenues for the fat in our products. Some of which are just derived via cultivated or cellular agriculture methods, and there are others as well that we're exploring. But I totally agree with Marion. I think fat is a hugely important component to the meat eating experience. A lot of times, cultivated meat and plant-based meats get lumped into this alternative protein language, and I actually think that is misleading. One, the idea of cultivated meat is to not be an alternative, but two, meat is much more than just protein, and fat is chief amongst the other components that are really critical to that meat eating experience. So I absolutely agree.
But still, the most of the part at the moment, from your experience, all of you, is they more concentrating on the protein at the moment still, yes? Or is it fat also the new player?
No, I'd say it's everything. Yeah, I think a lot of companies are, and there are, as Marion mentioned, some companies that are exclusively focused on cultivated fat. But I think any company that's making an end-to-end product that's not incorporating fat into their thinking is, they're leaving a lot on the table.
Okay, thanks. And what are the main selling points, David, from you to the consumers to make the selection between the cultivated meat and the conventional meat, and especially maybe perspective of US, because we know the situation in Europe?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the answer really depends on what consumers you're talking about. And so some of that is geographic, but even within a country like the US, there's going to be a lot of different consumer segments who care about a lot of different things. So I think the sort of early adopters who will be willing to, when the product is available at a relatively small scale, likely at a higher price point than conventionally produced meat, who's going to go out of their way to try something and pay a little extra for something? It's going to be somebody who's excited about the production process, somebody who's excited about either the sustainability from an environmental side, the animal welfare impacts, the public health impacts, and or somebody who's just excited to try the next thing in food and something that they see as sort of the cutting edge of sort of the future of food and the future of meat. I think as we start to scale up and sort of broaden the scope of the sort of consumer we're going after, then it becomes much more sort of traditional food metrics of taste and texture, affordability, things like that. And I think, so there's sort of and that stuff, I should say, will be important from day one. Every consumer cares about that, even if they also care about environmental impact and these other metrics. But I think the product attributes themselves will become more and more key as you widen the scope and the aperture of the consumer segment that you're going after.
Okay, thank you. Marion, can you explain, maybe I'm not correct, but as I understood, the Gelatex started with a bit different idea, and at some point you reached to the cultivated meat. Can you explain a bit more about this process?
Sure. Yeah, we started already in 2016. The first 3 years it was part-time thing, but basically my background is in textile industry. And we met with my co-founder in the University of Tartu when I was doing my MBA, and he was studying material science. And he was developing gelatin nanofibrous materials, and we kind of came up with the idea of using these materials for making a leather-like textile. So initially we started with this idea. So the idea was basically giving higher value for the waste from meat industries, because currently still the way how meat is produced, there's like a lot of waste that is unused. In Estonia, for instance, it's simply burnt. So actually we came up with calculations that simply turning this waste into gelatin and then turning it into a textile, we could make 2 million square meters of leather alternative. So just for Estonia, that has 1.3 million people. So this was the idea. Because of our own need, we had to scale up, because the material consisted of nanofibers, so we had to scale up the production of nanofibers. So because of our own need, we developed the fastest technology in the world, how to produce bio-based nanofibers on large scale, which enables actually over 90% price reduction. And in 2020, already along the way, we learned about cultured meat, that it's actually there are better ways how to produce meat, so there is no waste at all. So this is first thing, and then in 2020, I would say the COVID pandemic a little bit was the reason why we kind of realized the full potential of our technology and what is really the strongest asset, which is the nanofibers production, which we are really the best at, and we decided to pivot. And cultured meat became our main focus simply because it was, I would say it was the closest to our heart. Also somewhat connected to what we did before, but it's just what our whole team, I think, is really passionate about this field, is that even though like nanofibers have so many different uses, and we definitely want to also kind of offer our technology in these areas, then in cultured meat we can like fundamentally change something, like the way how meat is produced today, we can fundamentally do it in a different way, but still have the same meat. So yes, that's when we pivoted.
Thank you. And you are offering the structures, but what kind of companies you're working together with? Who is providing the cultured meat part? Are they from Europe, US, or how is this? What is the cooperation between different companies?
All around the world. We are working together. So there are, I would say, they're constantly changing the numbers, but some roughly like 150 companies in this space, some that are completely like focused on cultured meat only, some that are like enabling technologies like us, some that are making fats only, something like that, or bioreactors. We are piloting with, I think the last number was 67 companies actively. Many of them have done already their like first chicken fillet prototypes, or also some other crazy things. Yes, what was the question?
So maybe some examples of cooperation. That was the main.
Everything is under NDA, so I cannot really name the names, to be honest.
That's fair. I'm sure that's fair. But what about the competition in this case? Are there any competitors who are working quite similar field?
There are some, yes, and that's. I mean, it's always good to have someone else as well because it shows that there is actual need for that. Yes, there are some. I think our main advantage really is on our nanofiber production technology, which enables higher scale, but also very unique structure for the material. Because like the job of these materials is to kind of mimic the natural extracellular matrix, which is the non-cellular component in a tissue, so that the cells would kind of feel like they're at home, very simply said. And our materials have a very unique 3D structure. And we can actually see that it's much more similar to compare to other materials. Yeah, so the cells really love the material.
Very good, thank you. So Marion, you have also, as you mentioned, European startups. I would like to ask this political question. What's up with Europe? When are we allowing the cultivated meat?
Whoa, that's the 2 billion question. I just wanted to add just something before, because I think it's very interesting. On the main drivers for cultivated meats is actually the organoleptic properties that I think plant-based, it's a very, very interesting market. It's a very direct answers to the challenges that we know today. We can put those products on the market very soon, but it's never actually going to reach the exact same organoleptic properties of meat, of fish, of like dairies product. And I think it's like basically the biggest drivers for consumer to buy like those products. The way it smells, the way it tastes, the way it behaves when you cook it, for example. And I think it will definitely be like one of the biggest drivers. I don't know if you have tried like cultivated meat, but honestly, when you try those products, you're like, wow, this is just something very new. I've never tried something like that. And I think it's the biggest driver. And I think education, and it comes with your question, actually I think education is something that we really need. Like in France, we really late on that. Like when you ask people like what is cultivated meat, like people, they just say that they don't want to eat this, but actually they're not really able to say what is it, what is this technology, what are those products from. So I think education is something that we really need to work on in France, but in Europe as well. And I think regulation is a really, really tough problem. It's, I think, the main bottleneck for cultivated meat now, because we see that the prices are going down, we see that the production is increasing, so this is great, but actually we just need regulation approval. So at the moment, Singapore is the only place in the world that where we can actually sell cell-based product, and Just Eat is the first company who actually sell their product. I think Europe, it's very conservative as well, so I think it's one of the blocking points as well on regulation.
There is less startups from Europe also in this case, yes?
Yeah, we do have a lot of startups. Yeah, definitely. And I think we see some progress. There's like a program called React EU. It was created during COVID, and basically they just announced that they will be giving a grant to Mozambique of 2 million euros just to work on cell media, for example. So we're moving forward, but I think it's very, like, Europe is very conservative, but also it's very slow in terms of like regulation. Those products, they're very new, they're very innovative, and I think we need to move a bit forward, but I think each government need to push also on the FDA and the USDA as well. But yeah, I know regulation, it's the big bottleneck.
Yeah, thank you. David, I know that there is many different meat that Upside is focused on, but what is the main focus at the moment, and maybe what is next in line, if you can reveal?
Yeah, well, the first product we'll commercialize will be chicken. Chicken is the most popular meat in the US. Soon it's going to be the most popular meat in the world. And it's also very versatile from a culinary perspective. It really lends itself to a lot of different types of cuisine. That said, we take pride in the fact that from the beginning, we have built a technology platform that we like to call species agnostic, meaning as long as we have the right cells, we can use that production technology to produce any type of meat you can imagine. And so we've already publicly debuted beef and duck along with chicken, and we're working on many others behind the scenes. In fact, earlier this year, we acquired a company based in Wisconsin that is focused on cultivated crustacean products and has done a lot of work on lobster as an example. And so many more to come. I can't say at this point what's going to be next after chicken, but stay tuned.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, I will have a question from the audience. So the cultivated proteins are gaining popularity. Cultivated oils, fats are also coming on the picture. What do you think will be the next ingredient that will be cultivated? So after the protein and the fat, is there something missing that needs to be used by biotechnology also? Who wants to go first? Is there something?
Yeah, I'm not maybe specialist in that. Maybe you know more, but I think one of the interesting areas really is the cell-based dairy as well. Like it's not not connected to meat now, but not exactly. Even like different types of technologies. So basically, creating the part of a cow that produces milk, and then. So this part basically starts to produce milk, something like that.
Yeah, I think the milk is also the...
different technologies out there.
Yeah, I'll add it. It's not exactly an ingredient in the final product, but there are a number of companies now that are specializing in producing ingredients used in the cell feed formulation or cell culture media formulation. So that is the materials that you're feeding the cells so that they're able to grow and multiply. And there are some folks that are just focused on, how can we get the most optimal, from a efficiency and cost perspective, ingredients there.
I think that's very important key also to the future. Yeah, thank you. There is the specific question to Marion. How large do you think the market for cell cultivation ingredients will be? And how large do you see estimated your own value proportion to be?
Very precise question. Basically, the way how we have calculated our market size is that basically 10% of meat, it still depends. It could be like 5%, could be in some cases 20 or 25%, but in average we think it could be something around 10% of the meat is whether a scaffold or a microcarrier. because our product is edible, so it's going to kind of remain inside the product as well. And we can basically calculate our market size like that. So we made some calculations that, for instance, in 2030, if only 1% of the whole meat consumption is cultured meat, then so 10% of this would be microcarrier or scaffold, and we would sell it with like 25 euros a kilogram, then the market size could be approximately 9 billion euros. And this is for the first year then, but it's from there on it's going to grow rapidly.
Yeah, thank you. And we already have a small discussion about that, but how to keep up the tempo in a field where regulations are high and the problems complex and delicate? So I don't know, we already discussed with this kind of regulation topic. Is there any other folks about that?
I think about regulation, we also need to talk about the fact that the lobby of meat is actually very strong as well, during a lot of pressure. I don't want to do like farming bashing, because actually we ask for a lot of years to have like very cheap meat produced, and now we're just like, oh, we don't want it anymore. But actually the fact is that the lobby of meat is very strong. So there's also something about like, should we create like something European, like association to also be represented in the European Commission?
There is actually a next question related to that. I think it's maybe best question to you. Does your work include any activities to reduce this kind of regulation barriers at the moment? Do you do any work on this field?
It's complicated to do lobbying when you're a venture capital, because it's not like really part of my work. But yeah, I think definitely we should have like, and I think last year they just launched the European Cell Agriculture Association. So we're kind of thinking of going into this as well. But I think because the lobby of meat is very strong, we definitely need to have something on a lobby of alternative proteins or lobby of, I don't know, fermentation enabled or cellular agriculture, just to also educate all the political makers on what are those technologies. And I think education is definitely super important. Like 4 years ago, nobody would be keen to eat like a precision fermentation product. And now we're just like, oh, but you know, like actually fermented product, like you eat a lot of them. It's just like, we just take this technology and we try to make it some innovation out of it. But if we actually do the same with agriculture cellular, it could be very, very strong as well, just to explain people, what are you eating, what is this technology, what are the actual dangers potentially? I don't know.
I think I just wanted to add that I think for like regulations to actually come in place earlier and move faster, I think media and journalists have a very strong impact on that as well. And they I don't know if there are any here in the audience, but I think a lot of work then can be done from that side as well, and be really careful with the way how we talk about cultivated meat. Or like, I think one of the issues or what kind of raises fear for people if it's like too scientific or like lab thing, you know. But if we talk about it, you know, it's a actual real meat. It's not some kind of crazy science chemical thing, right? So it's a natural thing. We just produce it in a different way. So I think that's very important.
Thank you. Yeah, David?
Yeah, just quickly, I would add two things. One, on the question of regulatory barriers around the world. I think one thing it's important to keep in mind is that in the same way that different types of consumers will be interested in these products for different reasons, the same is true for regulatory jurisdiction. So I think in Singapore, which, as Marion mentioned, is the only country that has approved sale of cultivated meat so far, there's a huge interest there in shoring up food security, given that, you know, they don't have a lot of arable land. And I think that has been one of the primary motivators to get them to move as quickly as they did. In the US, there's an interest across partisan lines in making sure the US continues to be a leader in food production. And you know, they believe, I think rightly so, that cultivated meat is going to be a big part of the future of food. And so it'd be a shame to not be a part of that. I think in other jurisdictions, it might be a concern about climate change, about animal welfare, about food safety. So it really depends on exactly what issues are most important. The other thing I'll add is I think the coalitional work that's happening is really interesting and really important. Upside Foods was a co-founder for a group called AMPS Innovation, stands for the Alliance for Meat, Poultry, and Seafood Innovation, which was the world's first trade association for the cultivated meat industry. It's just focused on US-based industry. And since then, we've seen the proliferation of a lot of other trade groups like SALAG Europe, like there's a similar group in the APAC region. And I think that is really important. It's also very unusual, at least in the US, for pre-revenue industries to organize in that sort of way. But I think it speaks to just how much interest there is in this space at such an early stage, how much of a part of the political and just general public conversation it is taking at this early stage, and how important it is to start that stakeholder communication as early as possible.
So in your mind, you have seen Europe also, we are complaining already here. In your mind, is US a bit ahead in Europe, in this case in the cultivated meat and the legislation part?
So, sorry, the question was...
Is the US ahead of the...
Yeah, I mean, so we are mostly focused on the US at this point. Ultimately, we want to be available globally. But I think the agencies in the U.S. Feel this sense of urgency for some of the reasons I mentioned, and so I think we'll see when we get that green light from them. We'll be ready to start selling as soon as that happens. I can't speak to Europe aside from I think the previous speaker and others on this panel have indicated that the European regulatory bodies might move a bit slower on some of these novel food products.
Yeah, I think I can just say that in Europe it seems that Netherlands is definitely ahead of other countries, and I mean not in EU anymore, but still in this region, UK as well is a little bit moving faster. So we actually from our side have worked with the UK like policymakers around that, because they asked basically our opinions about certain things.
And I would like to ask you from Marion, is the state funding you also? Do you have any state funding?
Yes, we actually just recently received one grant, so that's really helpful. And before that as well, we raised our seed round, so like first proper kind of equity investment round last year. But before that, the company was very much relying on different kinds of grants.
And also from you, David, how important is the government support overall in the industry? Because you helped a very nice budget on academic research on cultivated meat. Do you find this will be increasing trend?
I certainly hope so. I think it is crucially important. And if you look at other innovative technologies, the example that comes to mind is electric cars. They were the beneficiaries of a lot of government support because there was a recognition that the values they stood for were aligned with the values of the California government or the US government. And I think that's the sort of thing where, we've already seen that from a number of governments across the world. And I think that speaks to how much interest there is in this space. Certainly in the US, in India, Israel, Japan, the Netherlands, Estonia apparently. So hopefully that continues. I think one of the interesting trends, so far most of that research has been towards academic work, which is hugely important. We advocated for a $5 million budget allocation in the state of California for that sort of academic research, as you mentioned, which wound up passing, and we were very happy about. I think there are other opportunities in terms of capital that might be easier to use by industry players as well that should be considered. And so I think there are a number of ways in which government support can sort of help accelerate the industry and help take risks where industry investors might be a little more skittish.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question about who wants to answer first. What are your thoughts about the GMO outside of the lab? It has been the audience is saying that we haven't touched the GMO topic yet. What are your thoughts about that? Is it essential in case of cultivated meat or cultivated fat or these kind of things?
Yeah, it is. It is possible to make cultivated meat without the use of genetic engineering, and we've done it at Upside Foods. I think at the end of the day, we see genetic engineering as a tool in the toolkit, and if it can help us achieve our mission of creating a more sustainable, more humane, more food-safe food system, then we're open to it. To date, though, the products we've made have not required genetic engineering, and I think this is another area where we're talking about the different preferences of various regulatory regimes and different consumers as well. This might come into play. Some consumers, some regulatory regimes might be more or less enthusiastic about those sorts of tools, and that could be one of the determinants of how much they're incorporated, if at all.
This will speed up the process, yes.
It very well could. Yeah, I mean, it could be one of the tools used to, for instance, make cultivated meat more accessible and more affordable to people, or make it more efficient and therefore more sustainable from an environmental perspective, or make it so that the cells last longer and you don't need to go back to the animals. And so there's a number of ways in which it could actually be quite important to increasing the positive impact on the planet, but it is not essential in that you can make cultivated meat without it.
Thank you, Marion.
Yeah, and I think also it depends on the target, the market that the company is targeting. I think in the US, the question of GMO is not a barrier, basically. You could launch a product even if there's GMO inside. In Europe, I think consumers, they don't want GMO, basically. So I totally agree with you, David. If it's improving a lot the product, then fine. But I think it's at Big Idea Venture, we're definitely looking at the fact, is there GMO in the final product? And actually, the regulation is very different between Europe and the US. Like basically in the US, if we don't find GMO in your final product, then you're considered as GMO-free. In Europe, even if we don't find GMO in your final product, if we know that you're using GMO or DNA in your upstream process or in making the product, even if we don't find GMO in the final product, then you would be considered GMO.
Yeah, that's again difference between US and Europe. Okay, but we have 3 minutes left. We'll have final questions for everybody. First, Marion, what should traditional meat companies do in light of rapid development in plant-based foods, cultivated meat, fungi? What would be your recommendations to these companies?
You mean how they can potentially work with cultivated?
What they can do to also, should they go with the flow to start also investing in cultivated meat? And
I think that there's two questions here. Like the first one is definitely, I think like the big food producer, they have their role to play in this cultivated meat industry by bringing consumer acceptance on the market. I think like if tomorrow like Danone or Nestle is launching a cultivated meat product on the market, then consumer acceptance will be way more easy than if you're just a startup and that like no one knows you basically. And I think the second one is we see more and more hybrid products in the sense that I think we can bring the best of both worlds. For example, having like a plant-based product and then you could add like cultivated fat inside, for example. And then you bring the best of both worlds and then you can have like very, very organoleptic in terms of very good product, in terms of taste, texture. So I think they could definitely work together.
So this kind of cooperation is really important in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, even with in our portfolio, we see more and more startups willing to potentially work with conventional meat and conventional animal product, because also in terms of the price, if you want to reach price parity, then it's definitely one of a way to have like a very cheaper product. And start to bring those products on the market in a very smooth way. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So David, maybe a bit strange question for you, but will we eat mammoths in future? And I know Lauri Reuter likes to say human mozzarella and panda nuggets. What are your thoughts about that?
It's a great question. It's not something we're focused on at Upside. We're really focused on products that consumers eat commonly. So like I said, Chicken's our first product, and that is because the exact opposite in that it is, the most popular product in the US. I think, look, there are some companies that are focused on that, and I think there may be some niche consumer segment for that in the future, but at Upside, we're pretty laser focused on the highest impact products.
So no crazy things like panda nuggets?
Not at this time.
Would you eat it?
I'd try it, yeah.
Yeah, I think also, but at some point it's maybe a bit strange. Okay, but last question, Marion, what do you think? Would we eat all kind of cultivated meat in the future? Not maybe panda then, but let's say all this kind of, or will there be some specific one that will pop out and will stay like the mainstream?
What I think, there are so many different companies working with different species, and I think it seems like majority of focus is still on something that we're more used to, so like chicken or pork or beef, and I think this is what will definitely remain. But I think what is very interesting in cultivated meat space is that it opens up opportunities in areas that for meats that maybe we could not eat otherwise. So I don't know, a lion or something more exotic maybe.
So you would
that
eat
could
panda
actually,
nuggets.
or reindeer that we talked about,
reindeer,
right?
Yeah, yeah, reindeer. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an interesting opportunity for the future.
I think this gives us so many different possibilities, and this is cultivated, so we can cultivate whatever species then in this case. But okay, our time is up. I think, our time is up. I don't want to exceed the program. We have a prize to give the best question. Was there any question from the audience that picked up your mind? I, of course, mix them up again. Maybe the GMO question, will be the next interesting topic, my suggestion. Or the fat.
I think the new product that we could produce with cultivated technology is quite interesting.
The new products, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The question about that, please come and pick up your prize from me. But thank you so much. Looking forward to the cultivated meat, looking forward to all the new interesting products out of there. So thank you. And Karin, please.